I think that one thing that it is worth pointing out as well is that there is a really significant, let's say, roadblock thrown in the way of people having the right way of talking or thinking about this issue that I think comes from, I don't know, you could say maybe Hellenistic influenced Western theology, or I don't know if it's purely Western, because I think you see some of this also in Islamic theology, but there's this greater tendency, I think, because of the influence of Islamic and Christian thought, that really at this point has seeped in various ways into a lot of Jewish thought as well, to talk about the question of whether it's worth it or the right idea to sort of turn and serve Hashem, as though the first question that we should be asking is, well, does this person, or not person, but does this personality, does this individual, does this God that is being referred to here, in fact exist? And if so, then you could weigh the question of whether or not it was really such a good idea for Moshe or Bnei Israel to decide that when they were going to be breaking free from Paro, they were going to go and serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu instead of some other option that might have been presented to them, right? And so once you talk in those terms, which is, I think, really a fundamentally maybe not exclusively Western, but let's say, I think both Christianity and Islam in their way are influenced a lot by Greek thought, and they both post-date the encounter between Hellenism and Judaic thought in their origination, and so that comes through in the philosophy and theology. When you look at things in these terms, then the modern Enlightenment kind of approach, or post-Enlightenment approach, everything that we get from like the last several centuries, it just kind of says like, oh, but then we figured out that actually it turns out this belief in the existence of this deity that we call HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not well founded, and therefore it's a moot discussion, right? Like, now we don't have to really talk about the question of whether or not you should serve God according to the description given in the Bible, because we've done the science or whatever else, and we figured out that people used to believe this kind of stuff, but now it's not true, and so it's a moot point. It's not worth considering. And then it's like, well, we still have in this story an inspiring tale of people's struggle for freedom, and I like freedom and you like freedom. This is a quote unquote free society, and so let's focus on that. And I think that that is a serious problem in how people are coming to the text usually, where and I think the that would be the sort of the most glib rejoinder to this argument that I've been putting forward here, essentially, that you say that this is about not just being free from something else like Paro, but about serving Hashem. But someone who claims that is somehow laboring under some delusion of believing in the existence of something that in fact doesn't exist. And so people who are not convinced of the existence of the relevant party, they don't have to worry about the question of whether they should be serving him or not. But I think that if you read the Torah instead to be helping you to understand the meaning of this term, like who is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through the lens of what is true about the world in which you live, right? That the context of usage of Hashem's name combined with the facts of what the world is and the presumption that the Torah is true, that helps you to discover what this word actually means and what is its proper use. Like when we talk about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what are we really saying? And I think when read in those terms, it's not an existence question anymore. It's saying that you could talk about it in more abstract terms for a second and say, let us conceive of the idea of that which is worth serving, right? So now we go to Mitzrayim and we look at the situation, and what the Torah is talking about here is it's saying there is a choice here given to this people. They can be slaves to Paro, or if they break free from Paro, they can dedicate themselves to serving that which actually is worth serving. And that is Ekadosh Baruch Hu, right? And I think the reason it's worth putting things in those terms is because then you can go over to people who are maybe more inclined to focus on the freedom aspect, and you can just ask the question, okay, so you think freedom is good, you want to be free, you don't want to be slaves. Why do you want to be free? What do you want to do with that freedom? What is it worth it to do? And how is it not the case that you will not just become a slave to something else in a way that also will lead ultimately to bitterness and oppression? Because, I think we saw a lot in the 20th century, like how quickly, with all the sort of casuistry of the communists and everything else, like you can, or and casuistry and sophistry, like the whole 9 yards, but it's very easy to look at a society that's supposedly free, if you're, a Marxist, and say, well, it may be that they're not called slaves technically, but they have false consciousness and they're really just like cogs in the machine, and the capitalist machine is like grinding their souls to dust, and they actually need to be liberated, and history has this sort of process going on that's going to lead to their liberation, all this sort of Marxist nonsense. But the truth of it, because there's a grain of truth in all successful ideologies, and so there's a grain of truth in Marxism, however perverse and ultimately idolatrous it was in its own way. But the grain of truth of it is saying, like, there is a level at which your notion of what kind of freedom you have in an economic system is this construction that really, you've decided to become a party to, where you say, like, well, I conceive of myself as not being a slave, and again, in the Marxist view, because I have this false consciousness of I'm free to do things, but really, like, the system only presents me with certain choices, and I just have to act like a cog in that machine. And I don't get to decide, what the system is. And of course, like, when the communists then get to have their revolution, they create another system where people in a different way are, slaves. But they can also create an ideology that says, like, no, you're not a slave. So, people in the Soviet Union at some level were all slaves to the state, but they weren't told they were slaves. They were told this is freedom. And round we go. Like, you can always claim at some level that everyone, in any system, there's a story, the kind of cynical, social critical kind of story, where you can look at it and say, that's not freedom, that's a form of slavery, because anyone who's accepted some kind of compact to be part of some social and political and economic system, they're constrained in certain ways by those commitments, and you can call that kind of a form of servitude. And then we come back to the question, so what system can you be a part of where there is a deeply meaningful sense in which your commitment to that servitude still constitutes some kind of gift of ultimate freedom to you? And that is, I think, the thesis that the Torah is really putting forward. It's saying, look, if what you want is cherut, like if what you want is freedom, you're not going to be able to achieve anything that's worth having simply by throwing off the shackles, and then whatever happens afterwards is just by definition better, because the human condition is one that has so many demands, like food and water and military, or more general kind of physical security, and access to territory in which to guarantee all of those things, and whatever, that the human condition remains the human condition. And even if you kind of get to go up the mountain for a second, or you climb out of the swamp, or whatever you want to call it, you're going to roll right back down in a different direction into some other form of servitude. And what is the one alternative to that? And it becomes connected with the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What is the one alternative where there's something uniquely different about a kind of choice to serve and a choice to be, dedicated in a way where you are in some ways accepting constraints and, giving up on being able to choose certain kinds of things for yourself. But what, is a form of that choice that it's still fair to call freedom once you do that. And the claim of the Torah, and this has to be kind of examined more deeply another time, but I think it's a verifiable claim, and I think it's a very profound claim. The claim of the Torah is that relating to Hashem through the Torah is the path to that kind of freedom. And we are always going to have people who, they can't face that claim because they, or I don't know if we're always going to have them, but we certainly in this day and age, we have no shortage of people who find it difficult to even start into that discussion, again, because it sounds like the sort of pagan or cartoonish version of the claim, which is, oh, well, Hashem is just one of many different sort of cartoon gods or whatever that you could choose from. And if you choose him, that somehow things are better. Whereas in fact, I think the thesis of the Torah is sort of the opposite of that. What it's saying is that at some level, if you were to engage in a full enough study of the human condition, and you could somehow arrive at an understanding of what it is in the midst of the human condition that actually is worth serving, because you're going to serve something, you're going to end up being locked in some way, and there's no way of avoiding that, then you would ultimately discover that Hashem was the way of doing something unique and different, and not just picking one or another kind of false idol that leads down a crooked path. But it's in order to express that, the best way of expressing that is simply to use the language and say that Akadosh Baruch Hu is, the creator of the world, that he had a special love for Avraham Avinu, and there's this people that's descended from him that he sort of took an interest in as a result and had a special plan for, and that he responds to our willingness to listen to him, and I think also crucially be willing to blaspheme the false gods of others in our radical turn towards seeking to serve him instead of serving those idols.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.